press conference. So if it is so important, why haven't you done it in previous sessions when you had an opportunity?
Well, we all have different pieces of legislation we work on each session. This restoration of constitutional rights has been around now for 15 years, maybe. I can't recall the very first one. The last one was Tennessee in April of this year. So Tennessee is a fairly big-sized state, but now we're up to 20. We have some significant knowledge of things like murder rates, assault, rape in those states. We have some knowledge of various gun parameters in those states regarding actions against certain gun laws. So I think it's appropriate that a big state like Texas address this at this time.
Of course, someone could say it's appropriate for a big state like Texas to not do it because we're so unique in our size and diversity and our urban and really probably what I'd call, the major state. So I'm not going to ask you to name those. What'd you say in your debate? 22 states?
There are 20 states. Vermont has never had a prohibition.
You're such a smart person. I don't know where you went to. You've been talking about the Constitution all morning. I don't know where you went to law school. But surely, Senator, you don't want to compare Vermont as a guiding light for this state. I mean, they do have an income tax, do they not?
I think they do, yes. There are 5 states that don't.
I was just waiting to pull that one on you. I mean, we don't look to other states as a model for their financial condition, and I would actually say even their public safety.
You're right, we don't, but we look to other states for good ideas. We look to our history for good ideas. We look to our founding documents for good ideas. And I think this is a compilation of all those. So that's what we're doing here today.
Okay, so I hope we've established that we don't want to follow everything Delaware. I could name most of your states. Do you have a major urban how about a developed state? I will call many of them haven't developed. I don't know if Idaho's been discovered by most people yet, but is any of the other major metropolitan areas living under your conditions? I would say no.
There's, Tennessee has some pretty good-sized cities. Arizona has Phoenix. Mississippi has some decent-sized. Kentucky.
Oh yeah, Mississippi's a great one to look to.
You're right, though, Senator. They're not the big northeastern cities, Chicago. And if you want to go to that discussion, you look at the stringent gun laws associated with municipalities, cities, and states, and their murder rate, their problems associated with gun crime are dramatic. And we are prohibiting in those states, in those municipalities, ownership of a firearm for self-defense against our Constitution. And that's wrong. It shouldn't be happening. And so we're not going to let it happen in Texas. And this bill eases those restrictions that are currently in place in Texas.
Let me just, would you agree with this? And it's totally speculation, but it's fairly educated speculation. It will just be a matter of time that this state, if this law becomes law, it will just be a matter of time that it's changed and taken off our books. I don't know if it'll be 10 years, 20 years, could be like next session. Would you not agree at some point this will come off the books because it's going to be found to be so reckless? We'll have some data on the impact it has. I mean, I just think you're doing something that's ready to be defeated the next opportunity a body gets together. But you want to
Senator, I would.
Okay, 2 more issues I want to visit with you about. And this is probably the most serious question I could ask you. Do you support red flag laws? You're familiar with what the red flag laws are. If someone's threatening someone, through due process, law enforcement or administrators can go to court,
and
prove up that
take
this
your-
person is a risk, and for 90 days, they can't own a firearm. So do you support the red flag? Because
This bill isn't about red flag laws. I don't recall that getting to the Senate floor and being properly debated. I have reservations about it, red flag laws, and other than that knowledge of it, removing a firearm without conviction, without an actual.
you have due process. But don't you
I think there are
if your
pluses and
bill
minuses of
passes,
any.
which unfortunately I think it will, I would hope that you would consider a red flag law, because I think it will become even more critical that if someone has access to weapons, constitutional carry, and if they're threatening someone, family member, neighborhood dispute, and they're so irrational and dangerous that we would go through a due process and ask the courts to restrain them from owning a weapon and carrying a weapon under your provisions.
Senator, that individual can currently
I understand.
possess a firearm
That law.
and a long gun.
And quite frankly, I think it should be passed before we get to yours. I haven't been able to have a hearing, but maybe that'll be a part of this discussion. Certainly the leadership's listening to us. Let me close by asking you this, because I think on behalf of the body, I think each of the 31 members talk about family. So we're concerned about their safety and political well-being. You're familiar that some of our colleagues have started receiving mailers from gun proponents in recent days.
Including myself, yes, sir.
You received one?
Asking me to vote for this bill, yes.
They don't know you're the sponsor? Anyway, I assume you don't approve of that.
Senator,
The
right to
campaigning and threatening of members
now that's a
while
different
they're doing
story.
their job, I think, is reprehensible. And a couple of them have actually been, people have gone to their home and physically offended them. So,
Senator, I'd like to stay on the bill, on the questions, if we could.
yes, sir.
Thank you.
Senator, as you know, we have a right to free press. It is not a right to assault verbally in any manner, violate an individual, threaten an individual.
Sure.
Those are crimes, and they should be prosecuted if they happen.
Well, I just hope you'll join with me and others to say that it's just not good to try to intimidate members to vote a certain way while we're meeting in this session.
I don't think any member on this floor can be intimidated to vote a particular way.
Well, I beg to differ, but that's your opinion. Thank you.
We're going to try this again, members, because I do want to give the ladies a break, but I'm trying to get through the speakers. So please be respectful of our ladies up front here. Senator Alvarado, then Senator Miles, you'll be next. Senator Alvarado?
Thank you, Mr. President. I'd like to ask the author some questions.
Do you yield?
I yield. Thank you, Senator.
Senator Schwartner, you and I may not agree on this issue, but I do respect anybody who puts work into their bill, into their issue, and you obviously have done that. With that being said, the spin that you've put on this is, can't help but feel
Senator
a little
Alvarado?
dizzy from it, because
Thank you,
the
Mr.
spin,
President. I'd like to
especially
ask
on
the author some questions.
issues related to domestic violence, I'm going to talk about that in a minute, ask you some questions about that. But let's talk about the general sentiment of Texans overall. Are you aware that 59% of Texans oppose this bill, this issue, including 54% of independent voters in this state. Are you aware of those numbers?
Senator, I'm aware there are a number of polls that supposedly suggest opposition or support of this bill. It is controversial, and as we both know, you can word a poll in a certain way that usually engenders a response that you're seeking. Mark Twain said it best: you have lies, damn lies, and statistics, and right above that, right after that would probably be polls.
Well, all the polling that's been out on this issue, as late as I think today, I think UT released a poll, or at least it was covered in a news story. There's a pattern there. I mean, there's overwhelming opposition to this issue. So since this bill is clearly at odds with what the general public here in Texas is feeling, how can you explain to voters in the upcoming election of why you push this through?
I think I've articulated the reasons I presented this bill and advanced it as a sponsor in the Senate. I believe the bill speaks for itself. I believe there's been some misinformation overall in the media, as there is with any legislation that's working its way through the process. In the end, it's a simple concept of restoring a right to not just keep, but also bear arms without the requirement of a state license for self-defense on a person as they are in a holster in a public area. When you articulate it like that, should you bear arms for, should a person, and should a young lady be able to carry a firearm for self-defense? Your poll numbers change with time or with the way it's questioned. I'm doing this because I believe in this issue. I believe that the rights granted by our founding documents, our founding fathers, are to be upheld and supported and emphasized. And there have been movements over the years, for whatever reason, that limited those rights. And this is one attempt to restore some partial restriction that occurs when it comes to the Second Amendment right.
You think in Texas we have a system that was working, that there's a process to go through if you want an LTC? I mean, I know myself, many of others, we've been through that process. We have a license. We've been through the training. Some of us go and train.
I had an LTC.
Maintenance, yes.
Yes, you have one. I've had one. I do not have a current LTC. And I just decided not to renew it. But the process did not suffice for those that I mentioned regarding that really don't see themselves carrying a lot, but want to have that opportunity when they go in potentially different areas, dangerous areas, and they don't want to have to put in the time, effort, money, wait 60 days to get that permit. NAR, sometime in another situation, is an individual that needs their availability is self-protection in a fairly immediate circumstance. And they might be able to go purchase a gun and have it in their home, have it in their car, but they can't get out when they're pumping gas and carry it into the gas station or into any area in a common area without having that permit. They can do so if they went and purchased the AK-47 or shotgun, but they can't do it with their handgun. It makes no sense. And so I'm equilibrating and equalizing firearm ownership between a long gun and a handgun in our state.
Let's talk about a constituency in Texas that is kind of the economic backbone of our economy here, small businesses. Our small businesses have suffered, would you agree, from whether it's been Hurricane Harvey or Tropical Storm Imelda, the freeze, the economy? Would you agree that a lot of our businesses...
Certainly have, and you've authored some good legislation regarding that. I think I've voted for that out of committee too.
Okay. So how will this bill impact small businesses and their employees who are now placed in an, I'd say, uncomfortable position of enforcing firearms laws in the face of potentially hostile, and now armed patrons. And I ask that because we've seen what businesses have had to deal with when it came to mask wearing, right?
I'm sorry, as it pertains-
Wearing masks during the
Masks,
pandemic.
yes.
So again, we're putting our businesses in these uncomfortable positions. So what do you say to business owners who don't want to be in that position?
As you're well aware, businesses can post a 30-06 or 30-07 sign regarding concealed or open carry and prevent an individual from entering if they are carrying in those manners. This bill would allow for private businesses to post a sign under 30-05, criminal trespass, and do the same thing. There are rights of an individual business to refuse entry to any individual, I believe for any reason pretty much, that should be upheld and protected. At the same time, this allows for individuals to, 21 years of age or older, to carry a sidearm in a holster on their person in a common area and into businesses that do not post those signs, yes, as currently in law with regarding LTC.
Are you concerned about placing an unfunded mandate or burdensome regulation on small businesses who now have to comply with a lot of this? I mean, we're adding on another layer of regulation and concern for businesses. Do you see that?
Senator, I think the regulatory burden on businesses with this bill is extremely small compared to the tax and other regulatory burdens affiliated with whatever their governing entity is, whether it's a restaurant and whatever regulatory agency of the state that usually oversees their business.
Let's talk about property rights. Many of us, including myself, voted and supported Senate Bill 20, which elevated the private citizens' Second Amendment rights over business owners' private property rights. And there were, I know, two members I noticed, Senators Birdwell and Nichols, who opposed it and then had their statements submitted. And they both talked about property rights, the superseding of property rights under the rights guaranteed by the Fifth Amendment due process. So how can you reconcile this bill, which massively expands Second Amendment rights far beyond anything that the framers of our Constitution could have imagined, or current jurisprudence and visions, with its impact on Texas small business owners' Fifth Amendment private property rights?
I'm not sure exactly the question. I think both rights, Fifth Amendment rights, right to private property, shall not be infringed, as well as your Second Amendment rights are well protected in the wording of this bill and in current law regarding LTCs, with the posting of a sign and the allowance of business to refuse entry to an individual carrying a sidearm if they so choose, but at the same time respecting an individual in common areas to be able to possess that firearm.
Let me move on to the next topic. Domestic violence. There's been a few exchanges here on the floor between you and other senators on domestic violence. Are you aware that individuals convicted of a Class A or B misdemeanor may not hold a license to carry for 5 years after the date of conviction, and that DPS must suspend an LTC once a person is charged with a Class A or B misdemeanor?
One more time, if you'll say that, I'd appreciate it. Could you repeat that?
Sure. My question is, are you aware that individuals convicted of a Class A or Class B misdemeanor may not hold an LTC for 5 years after the date of conviction, and DPS must suspend the LTC once the person is charged with that Class A or B misdemeanor?
I am aware of that, yes.
All right. These individuals can't lawfully carry handguns in public. okay? But a person charged with a domestic violence crime is not prohibited under current state law from possessing firearms.
They're
Aware of
prohibited
that?
under current federal law from possessing. If they've been convicted of a misdemeanor crime of domestic violence, they cannot possess a firearm.
Okay, and you and I had discussion about this earlier because I've filed a bill now 2 sessions in a row to close the boyfriend loophole on this. And you mentioned about the federal law. And I'm reading something that was authored by Mr. Michael Foster, legislative attorney for the Congressional Research Service. And he cites here that, and I'm going to just quote from his writing, nevertheless, because of the definition of intimate partner is limited to spouses, co-parents, and cohabitants, current and former significant others who have never lived together and do not share a child appear to be excluded from the statutory definition. So there's a gray area when it comes to the definition of intimate partner.
I would agree there's been discussion about the definition of intimate partner regarding the enforcement of certain laws. I think it's a broader definition than just cohabitation.
Okay, but anyone involved in this situation would then have to go to federal court, and the line of question and the things that are determined, have you lived together? How long have you lived together? How long have you been in an intimate relationship? All these things that have to, they have to go through a checklist. I think it's something that ought to be addressed in this bill, and that's why I talked to you earlier about the amendment to close the boyfriend loophole.
Thank you, Senator. We did have that discussion. The concern I do think is already addressed with the prohibition of possession, both in federal law and then also current state law regarding possession. If you have a Class A assault against a family or household member in the past 5 years, state law prohibits that. There's issues concerning protective orders that prohibit possession of a firearm in state law, and of course the federal law I mentioned. I think there is actually a multitude of laws that are protective of situations of women or intimate partners or men in situations in which they are unsafe. So I appreciate the discussion. I think it has been and is currently addressed. I think this bill does nothing to diminish that safety.
Well, and I know there are several legislators, especially our women senators here, who feel strongly about this issue, and I hope you will reconsider the amendment later to close the boyfriend loophole. Okay. Let me just touch on something else regarding domestic violence. So, survivors of domestic violence are 5 times more likely to be killed by their abuser when the abuser has access to a firearm. However, current Texas law allows those in a dating relationship but convicted of family violence or subject to a restraining order based on family's violence to continue to possess a firearm. Again, we're still I think in a very gray area when it comes to the definition of the relationship and the fact that we still have a loophole in place that doesn't impact people who are not married, okay? According to statistics from FBI, calls for domestic violence intervention are the most dangerous calls that are handled by our law enforcement. Based on FBI data, domestic violence interventions resulted in an average of more than 4,000 officer assaults and 6 officer murders per year. Are you aware of those statistics?
I was not specifically aware of the numbers. Obviously, domestic violence is a very common thing, unfortunately, in our day and age. This bill has nothing to do, nor does it diminish the ability of law enforcement to enforce and arrest criminals that are assaulting individuals, abusing individuals, nor does it in any way change current laws regarding misuse of a firearm. These are wrong things that should not happen, that are crimes, that can be prosecuted. But the bill, again, going back to what it does, is allow the removal of a license requirement to possess a firearm in public.
Again, respect your work on this. Kindly disagree with it, but again, I think we're falling short when it comes to the domestic violence issue, and with this gray area of how you define an intimate relationship. I think it begs some clarification. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate your questions.
I'm coming to you, Senator Miles, and then Senator Eckhart, Senator Menendez. Senator Miles, for what purpose?
Questions to the author.
Do you
and
yield,
my neighbor.
Senator?
I yield, yes.
You're recognized, Senator Miles.
Thank you, Mr. President.
Yes, thank you, sir. Senator.
Senator Swardner, we took on a lot of testimony for this bill the other night.
I believe it was 197 people. Speaking of that, we had a hearing that started in the morning and went till about 7 o'clock at night. I think it was a very respectful hearing. As I mentioned earlier, there's significant feelings, significant opinions and beliefs about gun ownership in our state. And I applaud the witnesses and the senators for their participation. It's the House had to have this later in the evening, I think, when they heard this bill. So I think it was a good chance for all parties to have a discussion.
Well, I'm glad that everybody had a chance to have input, but I want to focus. Do you remember on the input from your big city police departments, such as Houston, Dallas, Austin? Do you remember the position they took on?
There were individuals from the major metropolitan police departments that came and testified against the bill, as they have with
the major metropolitan.
That's right.
Cities in Texas, police departments testified
As
against.
they have with pretty much every other gun bill that I'm aware of over the years.
Did they indicate to you why they were testifying against the bill?
There are feelings
Do you
upon
recall?
some law enforcement, not all, but some, that it hinders their ability to do their job and maybe puts them at a higher risk.
I'm sorry, I was a little chatter in the back. I couldn't hear you. Did you say it hinders their ability to do their job? Is that what I heard you say?
That is their opinion, yes.
That is their opinion? Mm-hmm. And these are people who are professional police officers that deal with criminals and crime every day, correct?
I would note, Senator, these are the
trained law enforcement
officers
officers
of those, our government relations individuals for those police departments. There are differing feelings regarding individuals in the Sheriff's Association and sheriffs that came and testified, as well as individuals that represent the union that are the rank and file police officers. So I would not say it's a unanimity of opinion of law enforcement. I believe there is always concern when we're dealing with firearm laws, and they are active, obviously, stakeholders in any sort of discussion. But I don't think there was not unanimity. There was support of provisions and the idea of restoration of constitutional rights and respect of those rights. The concern is how to balance that in today's society and their respective jurisdictions.
Okay, well, I'm going to agree with you that there probably wasn't any unanimity, as you described, but I want to go back to the major cities who deal with having to de-arm, who have to know if an individual has a firearm on them or not, that have to protect our communities. You know, organizations like the Texas Police Chiefs Association, who testified not in support of this bill. The Texas Association of Police Chiefs said no to this bill. The Texas Municipal Police Association and fraternal officers said no to this bill. Major cities like Dallas, San Antonio, said no to this bill. We don't need to banter back and forth about the other agencies, the sheriff's departments and things, because I'm going to give you that. Some of them did, okay?
I would also add that CLEAT was, I think, on the bill. They were not opposed to it. Combined Law Enforcement Agency of Texas.
Good old CLEAT. We can always count on them. You know, sometimes we can write bills and they sound good on paper, but when it gets time to get them back to our districts, depending on what districts we live in, they don't have the same effect that we think that they, you know, the way they were written and the purpose for what they were written. There may be different in your area. You live in, if I could ask respectfully?
Williamson County.
Williams County.
Yes.
You know, something that works in Williams County, and we write a bill here, may not always work in Harris County or Dallas or Austin or some of the big cities. We always get into a debate, Senator Perry, about the difference between rural areas of Texas and urban areas of Texas. And what we try to do on this floor is try to provide and write laws that will protect the entire state of Texas. Positive effects for the entire state of Texas. Am I right?
That's our job, yes, sir.
That's our job. Well, before I even go into, you know, how this bill, how I think as a former police officer, this bill is really going to affect a community like mine, I just want to break the bill down in a few areas with you to make sure for clarification before I start talking about that, okay? Is that all right?
Yes, sir.
So, HB 1927, it will allow people to openly carry a gun into police headquarters and removes the police department's discretion to limit this access or this action. Am I correct?
The bill currently places weapons are prohibited. I don't believe it's on that list. It does not expand or deal with places weapons are prohibited. Regarding how exactly police departments handle when a person carrying an LTC comes into a police station,
department.
or in this case would be carrying permitless. The bill does speak to where they would have to provide that individual access to a gun locker or other secure area before they go to restricted areas within the department.
So the answer to my question is yes, they can take them into a police department. In the police department's discretion, we've removed basically the police department's discretion.
Senator, it's consistent with long guns and LTC handgun holders right now. They are able to go to a police station and enter it, carrying their weapon, and then is, I believe, the department's rules and regulations about how it's handled within the department. But police departments are not part of Penal Code 46.03, which are places weapons are prohibited. They have to be holstered, of course, yes. They can't go in. If you have a gun out, obviously that is a threatening position of a firearm and is you're immediately subject to obviously arrest and removal of that handgun from your hand.
So the gun can be holstered and concealed, is my concern as a...
It would have to be holstered or may be concealed, yes.
It may be concealed.
Yes, sir.
And did you ask the opinion of police officers? I'm debating both of them. Did you ask the opinion of Did y'all ask the opinion of police officers about how they felt about having these guns in their police departments? Was there any questions brought about to even give them?
Specifically, I did not ask them that question as to whether or not having the guns and how it is currently with long guns and LTC holders that are
Long
carrying.
guns, would you agree with me that long guns, we can see those when you're carrying them? They're called long guns, so you can, they're kind of open and obvious?
Right, but you can carry now in an open manner or in a concealed manner. This bill would allow the permitless carry in an open manner or a concealed manner a handgun, yes, in a holster, of course.
When you're in public, do you think to yourself, or when you're out with your family, do you wonder or worry about if somebody standing next to you or somebody in a restaurant next to you is carrying a firearm or not?
Generally, when I see an individual carrying a firearm, I'm actually reassured that I have greater protection in that immediate region because of that.
But what if you can't see the firearm? Do you get worried?
In some ways, that's even better.
It's even better
If they're
you can't
carrying
see
in a
it?
concealed manner and an offense occurs, then the open carry maybe discourages certain actions. Concealed carry might actually save your life.
Concealed carry by. What if you're standing next to a non-law-abiding citizen, like the exchange that you and Senator Whitmire had, and you know this guy is not a law-abiding citizen, but he's standing next to your wife and your kids, and you're at a function. Does it come across your mind anytime?
Why would I presume a person's not law-abiding if I don't see them breaking the law?
Well, because I think the definition of law-abiding, we couldn't determine what a law-abiding person was in the exchange that you and Whitmire had. In the aspect of the bill, law-abiding is used to be consistent with the ability to possess a firearm and therefore be able to carry in a permitless manner. I'm going to get a little personal. Do you consider me law-abiding?
Yes, sir.
You
I do. Yes, sir.
Okay. Does it worry or bother you that, because your office is next door to my office, does it worry or bother you if there's a firearm in my office or not? Or like when your wife
Worry there's one in mine?
or like when your wife comes out and we greet each other and hug, do you worry about the fact that Boris may be carrying a firearm? Does that bother
I have
you?
no concern about Senator Miles, you carrying a firearm.
You're never worried about that?
No.
Okay.
I'm
debating
Senator Huffman mentioned we're happy you do.
I'm cool.
And there's absolutely no kidding aside. The carrying of a firearm, a handgun, a defensive weapon, by individuals in society, in my opinion, is something to allow to the greatest extent possible, and to be reassured by. I think we have a society that does have criminals, as we've seen across this nation, across this state. And there's a whole host of reasons why crime happens. But
do have permits, correct? That's what you said?
No, sir. Criminals generally do not have permits.
I feel safer knowing if a person has gone through, because there's one thing to have a gun, and there's another thing to know how to use a gun. And I'm sure some of the senators would agree with me on this floor. But under this law, there's no guarantee that we're going to be having people walking around with guns that actually know how to use those guns. And that's a fear.
Senator, your right to possess a firearm, I think, has a commensurate responsibility on the part of that citizen to avail themselves of proper training, proper gun ownership. But in the end, when we're exercising various rights, do we need various regulatory barriers to exercise.
Police are
those.
looking for this man after he sent a couple to the hospital. The husband and wife say he was acting belligerent on a northbound 4 train at the Bowling Green station in Lower Manhattan. The husband got into an argument with him, and they all got off at the East 170th Street and Jerome Avenue station in the Bronx. Police say the man followed the couple down the stairs, punched the husband in the back of the head, stabbed him in his arms and body, and pushed his wife down the stairs when she tried to stop him. If you recognize the man or have any information about the attack, call NYPD's Crime Stoppers hotline at 1-800-577.
It's just maybe a difference in opinion or thought between individuals about how much we allow citizens and trust in, almost like, I hate to say it, but you know, your children, as they grow up, they receive more responsibility and more trust. And for me, I trust our citizens. I trust our people to do the right thing, which includes firearm training, safe handling of firearms, and instruction of firearms if they are deficient in that.
Well, let me be very clear. As much as I love my people, and I want to say I trust them, I know that there's going to be people in my community who are going to carry firearms that don't have the training. Okay? But
I would argue or suggest to you, sir, that they might not be the ones that would go ahead and get an LTC, even though they and might be carrying potentially without that. So this is again about individuals.
But right now, Senator, they run the risk of violating a crime if they're carrying those guns without LTC. So, you know, there are dangerous people out there who have committed other crimes, but only been in legal trouble over gun possessions. Your bill allows them to expunge of criminal records solely related to the unlawful possession of a firearm. Wouldn't this make it harder for law enforcement to keep track of those individuals?
Yes, sir, and that's why I'm offering an amendment that removes that provision of the...
So you're going to offer an amendment to protect... What's that amendment going to say?
It's going to remove the expungement provision that was added on in the House, so that police and law enforcement will have a full delineation of their violations.
So, Senator, I thank you for that. So your bill also says that private property owners have to give notice to armed Texans to leave their property if they're armed. How does this interaction work? Don't you expect the people to be intimidated by somebody they know that's carrying a gun? For instance, just for instance, places like Walmart and Sam's, they tend to hire the private property as you come into the stores. And in the community where I live, and I'm proud to say that a lot of those greeters are special ed, or they have some kind of mental or physical handicap. They're the greeters at the doors. So with your bill, we're asking somebody like that, although there's something posted, because I understand that, although there's something posted, but they still have to be asked to remove their firearms. So those people are going to be put in a position where people who are just trying to make a living, who are in need, but you know, they're part of our societies too, they're going to be intimidated to have to ask an individual to remove their weapon under this bill as I read it. Is that not correct?
Senator, that aspect of the bill is also going to be removed in the amendment. Private businesses can now currently post the 30-06 and 30-07 sign regarding concealed or open carry and fulfill the notice to individuals that it is a business that does not allow the possession of a firearm within that premise. There was an aspect of the bill that would have required not only that notice, but also a verbal or written notification before that was enforceable, or If it was not given, it would be a defense to prosecution. Both of those provisions are removed in an amendment. Therefore, it reinstates, the amendment reinstates the provisions which allow for the current way is handled regarding enforcement of both places weapons are prohibited, as well as private property and criminal trespass on private property.
So we're going to have an amendment that's going to deal with this matter as well. But I thought I heard you saying, correct me if I'm wrong, sir, for places that don't sell firearms. Did I hear that correct?
If any sort of private property would fall under the criminal trespass criminal trespass code 30.5, and therefore would be able to post a sign. I do have a signage amendment that allows them to enforce the same way as currently is enforced for LTC carriers regarding notice given and enforcement thereafter.
Okay, so I didn't hear places that don't sell firearms.
That don't sell, yes. They would have the ability to avail themselves of their private property rights to restrict admittance of an individual carrying a firearm.
Okay. But with all that said, you're clear to understand that Walmart and Sam's do sell firearms.
I am clear on that, yes.
Okay. Senator Swartner.
Actually, I believe Walmart has stopped selling firearms, but I'm not for sure about that.
Say again?
I thought Walmart stopped selling firearms, but I can't fully recall.
I'm not advised. I'm not advised on that as well. Senator Swartner, would it be possible, if this bill becomes law, that any criminal will now be able to walk freely with a handgun in a holster with no fears of being arrested, as long as, in the eyes of an officer, they do not reasonably look like a risk? Is that fair to say?
Senator, you have to be able to possess that firearm to be able to carry it. And as a discussion with Senator Huffman, when there are a large group of individuals that are unable to possess a firearm, both because of federal and state law, and as such would be unable to carry that firearm in a permitless manner in Texas. They would be breaking the law if they were to do so. Okay.
And my last question before I make a statement and let you rest yourself, brother. The bill provides that DPS will collect any relevant information related to the carrying of firearms by a person in this state. Will you commit to undoing this law, if a violent crime rate starts to increase? So if we pass this bill and we start seeing a surge in a hot summer that we're anticipating having, with all the racial issues going on, with all the social injustice going on. So if we start to see a rise in violent crimes, much more than we have now, would you be willing to come back in the 88th legislative session and make adjustments to this bill?
Senator, I'm always willing to work with my colleagues on addressing issues that are brought forth by legislation and any unintended consequences. What we've seen in other states is variable in testimony, but overall it has had a negligible, it's been remarkably unremarkable in how it's affected individuals, as well as crime statistics. I've had individuals testify that it's diminished murder and rape and violent crime, and then I've seen individuals, or heard individuals that testified that it increased it some. So, but in general, it's not a dramatic change one way or the other from what I can gather at this time from my understanding of that issue.
Well, let me respectfully say that in Houston, Texas, Harris County, and my Harris County colleagues would have to agree with me, we're seeing some of the worst violent crime in the history of Houston and Harris County.
Senator, I understand that is occurring. There are a number of reasons probably for that.
Am I right, Bettencourt?
I would hope those people that are getting...
Am I right, ma'am?
that are doing violent crime are properly and fully executed to the extent of the law.
Okay, but my question still remains, if we see a spike across the state, because we're already seeing it in Houston, Harris County, and I think Senator West, I think y'all are seeing a spike in crime and major crime in Dallas. Senator Mendez, I think y'all are seeing it in San Antonio. Would you agree? Senator Eckhart, are you seeing it in Austin? So in the major hubs, the urban hubs of our state, we're already experiencing a spike. And when this bill becomes law, I think it's going to be easy to say it's going to double. I'm not an expert. I know my community. I know what this is going to cause, what kind of effects this is going to cause in my community. I know how it's going to allow more profiling in my community. I know how the brothers and sisters and my Latino brothers and Anglo brothers in my community are going to respond. And let me tell you, it's not going to be good. I think what we're doing with this bill is giving them a free license. We're basically saying the Wild Wild West is open. And we're going to have major problems. And all I'm asking you, one lawmaker to another lawmaker, is once we see the true effects of this bill, would you be willing to come back the following session and let's work together to turn things around?
Senator, as I said just a second ago, I'm always willing to work with my colleagues, yourself and others on this floor regarding any piece of legislation that's passed that has unintended consequences, including this bill.
Thank you, Senator Warner.
Thank you.
Thank you, members. Thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you, Senator Miles. Before I come to Senator Eckhart, I just want to remind the members that the motion to suspend is not a debatable motion. There are questions allowed, but please ask your questions of the senator. With that, Senator Eckhart, followed by Senator Menendez, followed by Senator West. Senator Eckhart, for what purpose?
To ask questions of the author.
Do you yield, Senator?
I yield.
You're recognized, Senator Eckhart.
Senator.
I'm going to try and use this newfangled device.
I got one specifically for this discussion today. Can you imagine holding that the entire time? Yes.
Thank you so much, Senator Schwertner. And first off, I want to thank you for the amendments I believe that you will be offering in a little bit, one that strikes section 4 and 10. I do believe that the expungement provision is very concerning from a law enforcement perspective. And also your proposed amendment to strike the personal, verbal, or written notice to exclude a person from a handgun carrier from a private business. I very much appreciate that. I have a few questions, and they really fall roughly into 3 categories. So I will try and be concise. Your bill creates a presumption that a stranger out for a walk with a visible holstered gun is a lawful carrier, correct?
That presumption is enshrined in our Constitution and founding documents. The Fourth Amendment regarding police when they look at a person like that, regarding illegal search and seizure, and what they call a Terry stop, being able to stop someone just because they are carrying a firearm. So when I see someone out for a walk that has a firearm, I don't necessarily think crime or criminal. And oftentimes I'm actually glad to see an individual partaking in their right to keep and bear a firearm. So
I disagree with you in how you framed your answer, but I take your answer to mean that yes, your bill, where we quibble perhaps is whether or not this presumption exists with or without your bill. but your bill definitely at least supports, if not creates, a presumption that a person visibly carrying a handgun that's holstered is a lawful carrier of that gun.
Senator, I certainly presume that. Citizens need to be trusted. Do we believe people and our fellow man? Or should we assume them guilty until proven innocent? So yes, I would agree with your question in the affirmative that my presumption would be one of innocence until proven guilty.
And we agree that armed does not necessarily mean dangerous. You and I agree on that point. Would you say you agree with that? I think you just did.
Yes, being armed is not an offensive posture. Carrying a sidearm, a defensive weapon, is a defensive action on the part of that individual.
Mm-hmm. So how does a police officer tell the difference before your bill and after your bill, since the police officer will no longer have the assurance that the individual is a licensed carrier, having passed a background check and having received training?
Senator, whether they're carrying a handgun under a permitless carry or a handgun holstered under, and again, holstered under LTC, or walking around with an AK-47, a police officer first has to have reasonable suspicion that that individual is performing or engaged in criminal activity before they stop them just because of the possession of that firearm. Whether, again, it's an AK-47, a shotgun, a holstered, licensed to carry individual, or in this case, an individual carrying in a permitless manner and in a holster. So that's, but as far as how they would go about, there's procedures I can go into them about how police, once they have that suspicion and stop an individual in reasonable cause, what they would do. But
well, let's go into that. I would love to do that. First, I want to state a statistic to make sure we're in agreement with it, that in 2020, out of 2,269, I'm sorry, that's not a total number, 2,269 applications for license to carry were denied. I'm going to try this again. Actually, 926 out of 2,269 applications were denied in 2020 because the individual making the application had a conviction for a felony.
And that individual would not be allowed to carry under this bill.
But we would not have the filter of the license to have identified those individuals, would we?
Senator, a felon is not able to possess a firearm nor carry a firearm in the state of Texas. This bill changes nothing regarding that.
But as Senator Miles was pointing out, we won't have that filter any longer without the license, correct?
In fact, this bill actually goes a step further. It enhances the penalties for felons caught possessing a firearm and changes them to from a third-degree felony to a second-degree felony with mandatory 5 years, 3G offense, which is a huge deterrent in the eyes of law enforcement when discussing with those stakeholders. So, felons shouldn't carry in Texas after this law is passed.
Only after they're caught. And so let's go to a hypothetical, because I'd really like to explore this with you. I did a little bit of this back in the day. So let's say a stranger is out for a walk today, before this bill passes. The stranger's out for a walk today with a visible holstered gun on the Capitol grounds as we're debating this bill. The stranger comes through the metal detectors and has a gun, but no license to carry it. Can a police officer refuse him entry into the public portion of this building?
If they are performing any disorderly conduct, certainly they can. There are current rules under regarding the Capitol complex are promulgated with input from leadership and the State Preservation Board and the chairs of administration on either side that govern firearms within the Capitol complex. And so this will have to be addressed regarding permitless carry if this bill were to become law.
So I'm asking you about today, though.
Today, they are not allowed to unless they have a license to carry, and if they do, they can carry in an open or concealed manner and enter the Capitol.
So can an officer seize a gun from an unlicensed carrier in this hypothetical?
They do not have a license to carry and are carrying in a public place, then I believe the answer is yes. I believe also a police officer has the ability to seize a gun for whatever reason they believe is appropriate, threatening activity, inappropriate display of the firearm, etc.
So after this bill passes, same hypothetical, person is walking through the metal detector and the metal detector goes off and they have a gun, but there's no longer a requirement for a license to carry. Can the officer refuse them entry?
We have not written the rules or regulations regarding the Capitol complex regarding that situation. It will need to be done before September 1st of this year if this law were to pass.
Okay, thank you for that. Let's go to the next hypothetical, tweaking it slightly. Let's say the stranger is out for a walk with a visible holstered gun today, and they walk into the public hallway outside of a city council chamber.